Hades never started a war, never assaulted anyone, never sent a plague, never punished someone who did not deserve it. The Greeks refused to say his name out loud. He was the most feared god on Olympus, and the only one who never gave anyone a real reason to fear him. After the war ended, there was a problem nobody had solved yet. The Titans were defeated. Cronus was gone. The gods who had fought to free the world were standing on the other side of a 10-year war, looking at everything that existed and needing to decide who got what. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades were the three brothers, the three sons of Cronus who had been swallowed and vomited back up and had fought the longest and hardest for the outcome that had just been achieved. The world needed to be divided. They drew lots. This matters more than it sounds. They did not negotiate. They did not let Zeus, who had led the final push against Cronus, simply take what he wanted and distribute the rest. They drew lots because drawing lots was the only genuinely fair method, and all three of them understood that fairness at this particular moment mattered more than advantage. That Zeus drew the sky, Poseidon drew the sea, Hades drew the underworld. That the ancient sources are careful here. They do not say Hades lost. They do not say he drew the short lot, or the bad lot, or the lot nobody wanted. They say he drew the underworld, which was his portion, his domain, his kingdom, his to rule as completely and permanently as Zeus ruled the sky and Poseidon ruled the sea. That most modern retellings treat the underworld as a consolation prize, the unwanted portion that nobody else would take. This is not what the ancient sources say, and it misunderstands what the underworld was. That the underworld was the destination of every human being who had ever lived or would ever live, the final address of every soul that had passed through the mortal world, the permanent residence of more inhabitants than the sky and the sea combined would ever have. It was vast. It was permanent. In some ways, it was more real than the world above it, because the world above was temporary, and the world below was not. The Hades ruled a kingdom that was always growing and never shrinking. Every death added to his population. Every generation that lived and died increased the number of souls under his authority. He did not need to conquer territory or manage gods encroaching on his domain. His domain expanded automatically, continuously, inevitably, with every heartbeat that stopped anywhere in the mortal world. He was the only god whose power increased without effort. He was also the only god whose subjects never left. Poseidon, quote, seas were full of sailors who eventually reached shore. Zeus's sky was crossed by birds and storms and prayers that came and went. Hades' kingdom received everyone who arrived and kept them permanently. The population of the underworld at any given moment was every human being who had ever died since the beginning of human existence. This was not a lesser domain. It was the largest kingdom in the Greek world by a margin that made comparison almost meaningless. Hades went to the underworld and stayed. He did not come to Olympus for the divine gatherings. He did not involve himself in the wars and politics of the gods above. He had a kingdom to run, and he ran it. And he did not need or want the company of beings who spent most of their existence making each other's lives complicated. The other gods found this unsettling. A god who did not want anything from them was a god they did not know how to manage. Every relationship on Olympus ran on exchange, favors given and owed, alliances made and broken, debts called in at strategic moments. Zeus managed Olympus through this system. He gave enough to keep the other gods cooperative and withheld enough to keep them dependent. It required everyone to want something he could provide. Hades did not want anything Zeus could provide. He had his kingdom, his throne, Cerberus at the gate, the rivers running through his domain, 3 judges processing the dead, a system that worked without requiring his constant intervention. He did not need Zeus's favor or political support. He did not need alliances because nobody was going to invade the underworld. He did not need resources because his kingdom required nothing except the continuous arrival of the dead, which was guaranteed by mortality itself. He was the most self-sufficient being in the Greek world. The other gods called this frightening. It was just independence. The Greeks did not hate Hades. They were afraid to think about him. That is a different thing. Hatred requires engagement. You have to think about something, form a view, decide the view is negative. The Greeks did not do this with Hades because thinking about Hades meant thinking about death, and thinking about death meant acknowledging it was coming. And acknowledging it was coming was the one thing the Greek world was organized to avoid. They had a word for him they used in public: Pluton, the wealthy one, a title referring to the mineral wealth beneath the earth, gold, silver, precious stones, that let people reference the god of the underworld without saying his actual name. Saying his name was considered bad luck. Not because Hades would be offended, because saying it out loud made the thing it referred to more present than people wanted. This is not how the Greeks treated gods they hated. They had gods they genuinely hated and were not shy about it. Ares was openly despised. His own father Zeus called him the most hateful of all the gods. The ancient sources record this without embarrassment. Everyone knew it. Eris was unwanted. Ate, goddess of ruin, was thrown off Olympus by Zeus and landed in the mortal world, where she caused problems ever after. Hades was not in this category. Nobody called him hateful. Nobody threw him off anything. Nobody told stories about his terrible decisions or the chaos he had caused in someone else's domain. They just did not say his name. Because his name was the name of the place everyone was going, and nobody wanted to think about where they were going. By the time the myths we know were written down, the distinction between Hades the god and the underworld as a concept had already collapsed. He was not a person who ruled a place. He was the place. Saying his name was saying the word for death without using the word for death. And the Greeks had decided even the indirect version was too much. What they did not do was construct stories about Hades being cruel. 3,000 years of mythology, hundreds of sources, the entire body of Greek religious literature, and Hades almost never appears as a villain. He appears as a presence, heavy, permanent, unavoidable, but not cruel, not capricious, not the kind of divine being who destroyed people for sport or punished the innocent for entertainment or let personal feeling override his function. He ran the underworld the way the underworld was supposed to be run. The dead arrived. They were judged. Those who had lived well went to Elysium. Those who had lived ordinary lives went to the Asphodel Meadows. Those who had committed genuine crimes went to Tartarus, where their punishments were specific to what they had done. This was a system, a real one, with rules that applied consistently to everyone, regardless of who they had been in life. The beggar and the king went through the same judgment. The hero and the coward stood before the same three judges. Wealth and status and divine favor meant nothing once you crossed the Styx, because the judges were evaluating the life itself, not the circumstances around it. This was not how things worked on Olympus. On Olympus, justice was a negotiation. Zeus punished who he wanted and overlooked what he wanted, and outcomes depended heavily on your connections and how recently you had done him a favor. Prometheus got chained to a rock for giving fire to humans. The gods who assaulted mortals received nothing. Arachne was turned into a spider for weaving an accurate tapestry. The pattern was not justice. It was power exercised selectively by beings above accountability. In the underworld, Accountability was the entire point. You could not bribe the judges. You could not call in favors with Hades. You could not send a messenger to explain that what looked like a crime was a misunderstanding. You came before Minos and Rhadamanthus and Aeacus with nothing except your life as it had actually been lived. They waited. The determination was final. The Greeks had built this deliberately. The underworld was where the inequities of mortal life were corrected, where the rich man who had crushed the poor man finally stood before judges who did not care about wealth, where the powerful man who had used his power against the weak faced an assessment that did not count power as a virtue. Hades administered that system, without corruption, without favoritism, without the divine self-interest that made every other god's domain a place where outcomes depended on your relationship with whoever was in charge. He was the most just administrator in the Greek world. The Greeks built him almost no temples. There were reasons beyond the reluctance to say his name. Temples were places of prayer, of petition, of asking a god for something. You went to Athena's temple to ask for wisdom. You went to Aphrodite's temple to ask for love. You went to Poseidon's temple to ask for safe passage at sea. The request was the point. What would you ask Hades for? You could not ask him to spare you from death because death was not his department. Thanatos handled death. Hades handled what came after. You could not ask him to be gentle in judgment because his judges were not gentle or harsh. They were accurate. And accuracy was not something you could pray around. You could not ask him to let you out because the underworld did not have that kind of exit. There was nothing to ask. So there were almost no temples. A few, in certain places, where the earth opened and people felt the presence of what was below, where the boundary between living and dead felt thinner than usual. But nothing like the great temple complexes of Zeus or Athena or Apollo. Nothing suggesting an ongoing relationship of petition and response. Hades did not want petitions. He wanted the dead to arrive in an orderly fashion and be processed correctly and remain where they were assigned. He got what he wanted. Every single day. Without asking anyone for anything. The underworld ran. Not the way Olympus ran, through constant negotiation and intervention and the continuous management of gods who wanted things from each other. The underworld ran the way a system runs when it has been correctly built and the person in charge understands it works best when left alone. Hades built it correctly. Then he left it alone. The geography mattered. The underworld was not a single dark room where the dead sat in undifferentiated misery. It was a structured place with distinct regions and a logic that connected those regions to the lives lived above. You entered through the gates, past Cerberus. 3 heads, 1 job. Keep the living out and the dead in. Not a monster that attacked indiscriminately. A guardian with a precise function. He was very good at it. Almost nobody got past him in either direction. Almost nobody. Past the gates, the dead came to the rivers. The Styx, which Charon ferried souls across for the price of a coin. The Greeks placed coins on the eyes or in the mouths of their dead for this reason, not ritual gesture, practical provision. A soul that arrived without payment waited on the near shore for 100 years before Charon would take them across. 100 years on the wrong side of the river was not how anyone wanted to begin their afterlife. This detail reveals something about how Hades structured things. The coin requirement was not cruelty. It was an incentive aimed at the living, not the dead. The dead could not provide their own coins. The living had to at burial, which meant the living had to bury their dead correctly, perform the rites, send the soul off with what it needed. If they did not, the dead suffered the consequences. The living, knowing this, performed the rites, the most elegantly designed incentive in the Greek world. Hades never had to enforce it. the structure enforced itself. Beyond the Styx, the dead came to the judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, 3 former kings chosen for their reputation for justice in life, now permanent administrators of the most important judicial function in the Greek world. They evaluated each soul, weighed the life, made the determination. Elysium was for the genuinely virtuous, heroes, the truly good, those who had lived in ways the judges found worth honoring. Not a reward for divine favor or birth or wealth, a destination earned by the actual content of a life. The asphodel meadows were for everyone else, the vast majority. Those who had lived ordinary lives, neither exceptional in virtue nor exceptional in wickedness, simply human. They existed in a gray and quiet place, neither punished nor content, simply present, not suffering, not joy. Existence without the sharp edges that made mortal life feel real. Tartarus was for the genuinely wicked, those who had committed crimes against the gods or against the fundamental order of things, each punishment specific to the crime. Tantalus stood in water beneath fruit he could never reach because he had violated the sacred obligation of hospitality at its most extreme. Sisyphus rolled his boulder because he had tried to make himself permanent in a world that was supposed to be temporary. Ixion spun on a wheel of fire because his crime had been against the queen of the gods herself. The punishments were not arbitrary, each one a precise response to what the person had done, constructed so the crime and the consequence mirrored each other in a way that communicated something about why the crime had been wrong. This was not cruelty. This was something closer to pedagogy, written in permanent ink. Hades did not assign the punishments out of anger. He administered consequences the Greek world had decided were appropriate. He was the administrator, not the architect of the moral framework. He made sure it was applied consistently and permanently to everyone who arrived, no exceptions, On Olympus, exceptions were the rule. Zeus made them constantly. Athena made them for her favorites, Apollo for his. The mortal world was full of heroes who had received divine assistance that let them do things ordinary mortals could not. The exceptions were how gods expressed preference and the complicated web of obligations that structured divine existence. In the underworld, there were no exceptions. Heracles came to take Cerberus, and Hades let him, because Heracles had divine sanction behind the request, and the rules of the labor required the attempt. But he had to take Cerberus without weapons and return him afterward. Conditions, limits. The exception was bounded by the same logic that governed everything else. Orpheus came with his music and moved Hades to tears. And Hades agreed to let Eurydice return, but with one condition. Do not look back until you have both crossed into the world of the living. Not cruelty, the minimum required acknowledgement that the underworld's rules existed, and even a temporary exception required some deference to them. Orpheus looked back. Eurydice returned to the dead. Hades had given everything the situation could give. The mortal had not held the one condition required. Hades did not punish Orpheus for this. He applied the consequence that had been clearly stated from the beginning. This is what justice looks like when it actually functions. Not mercy without limit, which is sentiment. Not punishment without consideration, which is cruelty. A clear framework, applied consistently, with conditions stated in advance and consequences that followed from whether those conditions were met. Hades ran the only genuinely just institution in the Greek world. The Greeks did not build him temples because there was nothing to ask him for. What you could not ask for was a different outcome than the one your life had actually earned. In every other divine domain, a different outcome was exactly what you were praying for. The underworld had one rule. You came in. You did not leave. Not a preference, not a guideline. The structural foundation of everything the underworld was. Everything else in Greek cosmology depended on that boundary holding. Death had to be permanent, or nothing else worked. The judges could not judge fairly if the judged could appeal by simply leaving. Elysium meant nothing if the asphodel dead could wander out. Tartarus was meaningless if Tantalus could decide the punishment was inconvenient and go home. The boundary had to hold. It almost always did. Almost. Sisyphus was the first serious test, and he was a test that Hades failed, which is worth noting because Hades almost never failed anything. Sisyphus was a king of Ephyra, and the craftiest mortal who had ever lived. Craftier than Odysseus, craftier than any hero who had used intelligence rather than strength to survive impossible situations. He had spent his entire life finding the edges of systems and slipping through them. He approached death the same way. When Thanatos came for him, Sisyphus trapped him. The details vary across sources, but the core is consistent. He bound the god of death, removed from the world the capacity for death to occur. While Thanatos was bound, nobody could die. Soldiers fell in battle and got up. Old men at the end of their lives lingered past where lingering was comfortable. The natural order stopped functioning because the mechanism by which it ended had been taken out of operation. Ares, whose entire domain depended on people actually dying in the wars he started, eventually freed Thanatos. Sisyphus was taken to the underworld. He had a plan for this too. Before he died, he had instructed his wife not to perform the funeral rites. No coins, no burial, no proper send-off. He arrived at the Styx without payment or ritual preparation. He went to Persephone and complained, this was an outrage. His wife had failed in her obligations. He needed to return to the living world to punish her and set things right. Persephone let him go. Sisyphus went home. He did not go back. He lived out his full natural life, died of old age, which was a considerably more comfortable death than the one originally arranged. When he arrived in the underworld the second time, there were no more schemes. He had used all of them. The boulder was waiting. The punishment was precise, the way all Tartarus punishments were precise. Sisyphus had spent his life refusing limits, refusing that systems had edges that could not be slipped through, refusing that death, the most fundamental limit of mortal existence, applied to him the way it applied to everyone else. His punishment was a limit that could never be slipped through, a task that approached completion and then reset forever. Without the clever solution he had spent his life finding, the boulder rolled back every time. It always would. Hades had let Sisyphus go once. He did not let anyone go again for the same reason. Orpheus was different. He was not looking for an edge or a loophole. He was a man who had lost his wife on their wedding day. She stepped on a snake in the grass and died before the celebration ended. And he descended into the underworld because he could not imagine a life without her, and he had nothing to offer except his music. He played for Charon, and Charon ferried him across without payment. He played for Cerberus, and Cerberus let him pass. He played for the dead themselves, and for the first time in the history of the underworld, the asphodel meadows were not gray and quiet, but full of souls standing still to hear something beautiful. He played for Hades and Persephone. The ancient sources say Hades wept. This is the only moment in the entire mythology where Hades displays something that looks like personal feeling. He was moved by the music, by the grief behind it, the specific quality of loss that Orpheus had converted into sound and offered to the god who received everyone who had ever been lost. Hades made the exception. One condition: do not look back until you have both crossed into the world of the living. What follows is the most discussed moment in Greek mythology in terms of why Orpheus looked back. The sources offer different reasons, and none fully satisfy because the real reason is not a reason at all. It is a human thing. The silence behind him was too much. The uncertainty that she was there was worse than knowing she was not. He needed to see her more than he needed to keep her. He looked back. Eurydice returned to the dead. Hades did not punish Orpheus. He did not take the music away or curse the lyre or condemn him to Tartarus. The condition had been stated. The consequence had been stated. The consequence followed from the condition being broken. That was all. Orpheus returned to the living world alone and spent the rest of his life in grief so complete that he refused all other love and was eventually torn apart by Maenads, the followers of Dionysus, who were offended by his rejection of them. Hades received him when he died. Whether he was reunited with Eurydice, the ancient sources do not all agree on. Some say yes, some say nothing. Hades did not issue a statement. He did not need to. Heracles came for Cerberus. The 12th labor, the final one. Eurystheus had assigned it because it seemed impossible. Go to the underworld, take the guardian of the gate, bring him back. Not kill him, take him. Bring him to the surface and present him to Eurystheus, who presumably had not thought through what he was going to do with a three-headed dog from the underworld once he had it. Heracles descended with divine sanction. Athena and Hermes accompanied him to the entrance. He had performed the Eleusinian mysteries. He arrived not as an intruder, but as a petitioner with credentials. Hades understood the difference. Heracles explained the labor, asked permission to take Cerberus, acknowledged he would return him when the labor was complete. Hades agreed on one condition: no weapons. He had to overpower the dog with his bare hands. Heracles overpowered the dog with his bare hands. He brought Cerberus to the surface. Eurystheus, upon seeing a three-headed dog from the underworld standing in his courtyard, hid in a large jar and asked Heracles to please take it back. Heracles returned Cerberus to the underworld. Hades received the dog back without comment. He did not help Heracles because he liked him or owed anyone a favor. He agreed because the request was legitimate. The petitioner had the right credentials, the condition was reasonable, and the condition was met. When the task was done, the transaction was complete, and Hades went back to running his kingdom. No drama, no lingering obligation. The stated condition was enough. It was always enough. There was also Theseus and Pirithous, who came with a plan that was not legitimate, and credentials that were not sufficient, and a request that was not going to be granted. Pirithous had decided he wanted Persephone as his wife. This was not a reasonable ambition. Persephone was the queen of the underworld, wife of Hades, a goddess whose marriage was one of the most structurally significant divine unions in Greek cosmology. Pirithous was a mortal king who had apparently decided no ambition was too large if you had the right friend. The right friend was Theseus, who had helped Pirithous with a previous impossible task and felt obligated to help with this one, which says something about the kind of loyalty that gets people into serious trouble. They descended into the underworld. Hades knew why they had come. He invited them to sit down. They sat in the chairs he offered and found they could not get up. The sources call them the chairs of forgetfulness. They sat and forgot why they had come and forgot who they were, and sat there, held, for what would have been eternity if Heracles had not arrived during the 12th labor and pulled Theseus free. Pirithous stayed. He is still there, by implication. The man who came to steal the queen of the underworld is sitting in a chair in the underworld, forgetting. Permanently. Hades did not punish Pirithous with pain or the elaborate suffering Tartarus reserved for permanent residents. He simply made it so Pirithous could not leave and could not remember why he had wanted to. The punishment matched the crime, the way all of Hades's punishments matched crimes. You came to take something that was not yours. You will stay where what you came to take lives, unable to take it, unable to leave, unable to remember what you wanted. Not rage, not cruelty. A precise, permanent response that made the punishment and the crime tell the same story. Hades wanted Persephone. This is the one moment in his entire mythology where he acts outside the boundaries of his own system. The one story where the god who ran the most just institution in the Greek world did something that was not just. The one moment where Hades is not the administrator but the person, and the person wanted something and took it. Worth sitting with before moving on. Because every other story about Hades is a story about a god who did not want things, who did not need things, who ran his kingdom without desire or ambition or the appetite that made every other god on Olympus a source of chaos for everyone around them. Hades was the exception to the rule, that gods were dangerous because they wanted things and used their power to get them. And then he saw Persephone. She was the daughter of Demeter and Zeus. Young, the sources describe her gathering flowers in a field in Sicily with her companions, in the specific kind of ordinary moment Greek mythology uses right before everything changes. Narcissus and lilies, and the particular quality of light in a meadow on a day that started like every other day. The earth opened. Hades came up in his chariot, took Persephone, and went back down. The ancient sources do not soften this. They call it an abduction. She did not choose to go. She cried out, and nobody heard her except Hecate, who heard from her cave but did not see, and Helios, the sun, who saw everything from above but said nothing until later. Demeter heard nothing. She came back to the field and found flowers and the absence of her daughter, and began the search that consumed her entirely for 9 days and 9 nights, without food or water or rest, carrying torches, asking everyone she encountered if they had seen a young woman taken against her will. Nobody told her anything useful for 9 days. On the 10th day, Helios told her what he had seen, and then he added something the ancient sources include as if it is a reasonable addition to the information he had just delivered. He told Demeter that Zeus had arranged it, that Zeus had given Persephone to Hades, that the marriage had been decided by the king of the gods before the abduction, and Hades was therefore not merely a kidnapper, but a bridegroom acting with divine authorization. This does not make it better. The ancient sources seem to understand this, even as they included, because Demeter's response to learning her brother had arranged her daughter's abduction without telling either of them is not relief. It is fury so complete that she leaves Olympus, abandons her divine function, and allows the earth to stop producing food. The crops failed. The ground hardened. Seeds did not germinate. Humans began to starve, and the gods began to notice that a world without living humans was a world without worship, and a world without worship was a problem requiring immediate attention. Zeus sent Hermes to the underworld to retrieve Persephone. Here is where the story gets complicated in the specific way Greek mythology gets complicated when something cannot be fully resolved. Persephone had eaten in the underworld 6 pomegranate seeds, depending on the source. Some say 3, some say 7. The number matters less than the fact. She had consumed food of the underworld, which bound her to it by a rule as fundamental as the rule that the dead did not leave. You ate the food of a place, and that place had a claim on you. That Hades had not forced her to eat. The sources are careful about this. She had eaten the seeds herself. Whether she had known what it meant, whether someone told her, whether she figured it out or did it by accident or with full understanding, the sources do not agree, and the ambiguity is probably deliberate. Greek mythology is rarely accidental about ambiguity. The compromise Zeus negotiated required Persephone to spend part of the year in the underworld and part above. The specific division varies. Some say 6 months below and 6 above. Some say 4 below and 8 above. What stays consistent is the structure. Part of the year with Hades, part with Demeter. The seasons exist because Demeter grieves when Persephone is below, and the earth reflects that grief, and blooms when she returns. This is one of the most elegant explanations of natural phenomena in any mythology. The seasons are not a meteorological event. They are a mother missing her daughter. The barrenness of winter is not absence of warmth. It is the specific quality of grief that comes from knowing someone you love is somewhere you cannot reach them. But the story does not end with the abduction and the compromise. It continues in a direction most retellings skip because it does not fit the simple narrative of kidnapper and victim. Persephone became queen of the underworld. Not a prisoner, not a captive waiting out her months below. Queen, with authority and presence and a real function. When Orpheus came and played his music, it was before both Hades and Persephone. When Sisyphus appealed for release, he appealed to Persephone. When the shades of the dead encountered divine authority in the underworld, they encountered both of them, thought Persephone judged. She decided. She had power in a kingdom that was now also hers, and she exercised it. There is a story about Minth, a water nymph who had been Hades' lover before Persephone, and who made the mistake, after the marriage, of claiming she was more beautiful than Persephone, and that Hades would eventually return to her. Persephone turned her into a mint plant, not Hades, Persephone, who had the authority and the inclination, and apparently the divine power, to act on both. This is not the behavior of a captive. This is the behavior of a queen who knows her position and defends it. What happened between Hades and Persephone over the length of Greek mythology is genuinely difficult to characterize simply. It began as an abduction. It became a marriage. Whether it became something more than a formal arrangement, whether Persephone found something in the underworld she would not have found above it, whether she was content or resigned, or something more complicated than either, the ancient sources leave this open in a way that suggests they understood the question was not simple. What is clear is that Hades, having taken her, treated her as a queen. He did not diminish her authority. He gave her half of everything he had built, and she ruled it alongside him, and the underworld functioned as it always had, correctly, with the specific quality of justice and permanence that made it the most reliable institution in the Greek world. He had done a terrible thing to get her there. What he built with her after was something else. The Greeks held both of these things at the same time, without resolving them into a simpler story, because they understood the world did not resolve into simpler stories. Things began badly and continued differently. People did things that could not be undone, and then lived inside the consequences, and built something inside those consequences that was real, even if the foundation was wrong. Hades had the most just kingdom in the Greek world. He had built it on an injustice. The Greeks wrote that down and did not try to fix it. Nobody hated Hades for anything he had done. This is what gets lost in every modern retelling that turns him into a villain. The ancient sources do not support it. There is no myth where Hades does something monstrous to an innocent person for entertainment. No story where he reaches into the world of the living to cause problems because he was bored or offended. No divine council scene where the other gods complain about what Hades has been doing lately. He ran his kingdom. He stayed in it. He did his job. and the Greeks feared him more than any other god. The fear was not about Hades. It was never about Hades. It was about what he represented, and what his kingdom meant, and what the existence of his domain said about the nature of mortal life. Hades was feared the way a mirror is feared by someone who does not want to see what is reflected in it. Not because the mirror has done anything wrong, because the mirror is accurate. Every other god in the Greek world offered something. Zeus offered power and protection, and the possibility of divine favor that could change a human life. You prayed to Zeus because Zeus could intervene, had intervened before, might intervene again. Poseidon offered safe passage or withheld it. Apollo offered prophecy and healing. Athena offered wisdom and strategic advantage. Aphrodite offered love and the irrational power of desire that moved kings and heroes and gods toward outcomes they had not planned. Demeter offered the harvest. Hephaestus offered craft. Hermes offered safe travel and the movement of things across boundaries that were supposed to hold. Every god offered something a living human being might want. Hades offered nothing. Not because he was withholding, because what he had was not something a living person could use. His kingdom was for the dead. His justice was for the dead. His geography of rivers and meadows and judgment halls was built entirely for beings who had already finished being alive. You could not pray to Hades for a better harvest. You could not ask him to protect your ships at sea. None of those things were in his domain. He had nothing to give you while you were still alive. What he had was waiting for you. That was the problem. Every time a Greek thought about Hades, they were not thinking about a distant god who might someday be relevant. They were thinking about their own death, the crossing, the judgment, the destination the judges would assign based on how they had actually lived rather than how they wanted to be seen to have lived. The permanence of it, the irreversibility, the fact that no amount of prayer or sacrifice or accumulated divine favor would change the outcome of the weighing once they arrived. This was not comfortable to think about, so they did not. They avoided his name. They built him almost no temples because temples were places you went to engage with a god, and engaging with Hades meant engaging with your own death and your own judgment, and the question of what the judges would find when they weighed your life. And that was a question most people preferred not to examine too closely. The avoidance was not about Hades, it was about mortality. Hades was the most vivid and permanent reminder that mortality existed. There is a passage in Homer where Achilles, in the underworld after his death, tells Odysseus he would rather be the lowest slave alive than the king of all the dead. This is always quoted as evidence of how terrible the underworld was. But Achilles is not describing the underworld's quality. He is describing the difference between being alive and being dead. Any life, even the worst life, has the specific quality of aliveness that no afterlife can replicate. The warmth, the unpredictability, the possibility that tomorrow will be different from today. The underworld had no tomorrow that was different from today. That was not Hades' fault. That was what death was. He had not designed mortality. He had not chosen to be the god of a permanent and irreversible destination. He had drawn a lot and administered what the lot gave him with more consistency and fairness and structural integrity than any other god in the Greek world had brought to anything. He had built something genuinely just in a world where justice was rare. And the Greeks, who understood this perfectly, still could not bring themselves to say his name out loud. Because saying his name meant acknowledging that the just and permanent and irreversible kingdom he administered was where they were going. All of them. Eventually. Without exception. That was the thing about Hades that no divine favor could change. and no prayer could deflect, and no hero's strength could prevent permanently. Sisyphus had tried. He was rolling a boulder. Pirithous had tried. He was sitting in a chair. Every mortal who had ever lived had gone to the underworld eventually, because that was where mortals went, and Hades was there when they arrived, and he would be there for every mortal not yet born, and every mortal who came after them, until the end of the world itself. The Greeks built temples to gods who might help them. They avoided the name of the god they could not avoid. Here is what Hades was. Not the villain, not the god of death, not the dark counterpart to Zeus's light, or the embodiment of everything the Greek world feared about what came after. Hades was the only god on Olympus who did his job. That is it. That is the whole story. Every other god had a domain and spent a significant portion of their divine existence doing things that had nothing to do with that domain, and frequently made things worse for everyone around them. Zeus was the god of justice, who was the most prolific source of injustice in the mythology. Hera was the goddess of marriage, who spent eternity punishing the victims of her husband's crimes. Poseidon was the god of the sea, who flooded cities over arguments he lost. Ares was the god of war, who was so bad at war that he lost fights to mortals and spent significant portions of the Iliad crying. Apollo was the god of truth, who sent plagues and caused the death of his own son, and made decisions based on personal feeling that had nothing to do with truth. Hades received the dead, housed them, judged them fairly through a system that applied the same standards to everyone, regardless of who they had been in life, maintained the boundary between the living and the dead with the seriousness that boundary required, administered punishments that matched crimes in ways that communicated something real about why the crimes had been wrong, made one exception for Orpheus, because the music was extraordinary and the grief behind it was real, and even Hades, in the deepest and most permanent kingdom in the Greek world, could be moved by something that beautiful. He ran the most just institution in the Greek world. He did it for eternity. Without complaint, without scandal, without a single myth in 3,000 years, where Hades was the one who started the problem. The Greeks feared him anyway. Not because he was fearful, because he was final. Fear of Hades was not fear of a dangerous being who might do something terrible to you. It was fear of what his existence represented. The ending, the accounting, the moment when the life you had actually lived was weighed against the life you had told yourself you were living, and the judges found whatever they found. Every other god in the Greek world could be managed. Zeus could be appeased with sacrifice and the right connections. Athena could be won over with demonstrated wisdom and devotion. Apollo could be placated with correct ritual observance. Poseidon could be offered the right gifts at the right moment. The gods of Olympus were powerful, but they were beings with wants and preferences and relationships that could be navigated if you understood them well enough. Hades could not be managed. Not because he was more powerful, he was not. Zeus had the lightning, Poseidon had the sea. The hierarchy of divine power did not place Hades at the top. He could be argued with. He could grant exceptions when they were warranted. He had let Orpheus through. He had let Heracles take Cerberus. He had negotiated over Persephone. He could not be managed because his function was not personal. It was structural. The dead came to the underworld because that was where the dead went. The judgment happened because the judgment was the point. The consequences followed from the judgment, because consequences were the only thing that made the judgment real. None of this depended on Hades' mood, or his relationships, or his accumulated obligations. It depended on the structure itself, which Hades administered but did not own, and could not change even if he had wanted to. He was not the source of the finality. He was its administrator. The Greeks understood this and feared the finality anyway, and transferred that fear onto the administrator because the administrator was the face of it. The name that, said aloud, made the thing real. The God who, acknowledged, required the acknowledgement that you were going to need him someday. So they called him Pluton, the wealthy one, the god of the earth's mineral riches, the name that referred to everything he governed except the part that mattered most. They built him almost no temples, did not name their children after him, did not tell cheerful stories about his intervention in mortal affairs, did not invoke him at festivals or construct elaborate mythology around his personality and preferences the way they did for every other major deity. They left him alone in his kingdom with his wife and his three-headed dog and his 3 judges, and the continuously growing population of every human being who had ever died. And they tried, as much as possible, not to think about the fact that they were going to join that population eventually. Hades did not mind. He was not running a kingdom that required their attention or gratitude or prayers. He was running a kingdom that required only one thing from every mortal who had ever lived. Their arrival. They would all provide it. In their own time. Without exception. He could wait. He was very good at waiting.